God bless you and welcome to our fourth study on understanding Genesis. My name is Dr. Prince Maurice Parker, and let's get into the Word today. I'm going to continue my studies, and today I'm going to enter into the first verses of Genesis chapter 1. And let's take a deeper look at it and insights into what these verses are telling us. But before we do that, I just want to add a couple of things to our third study, and I want to before we go on to Genesis 1, I want to share two photos that I took close to 20 years ago, right outside of the Tell of Jericho, and it was on an archaeological dig in another part of Israel, and of course I always like to go by Jericho and especially to the Tell. A tell is a large hill that archaeologists and geologists know is not a natural occurrence. It's not a normal hill, but rather it's a city that has been built in an ideal place and destroyed. But because it was an ideal place, they built again on it, and consecutively over a period of time it was destroyed. And you can get to a place like Megiddo, and you might have a city that's built 12 or 13 times over the same site, and it becomes a respectable tell. Jericho is a pretty good sized tell, and of course we have the tale of Jericho in the book of Joshua. Well, that's in that tell, and tells us quite a bit about the history of that city and the historicity of that city. So I want to show you a couple of photos that I took there. And these photos are referring back to our third study about the Old Earth, OCE, Old Earth, Orthodox Old Earth creationism, and what the nation of Israel and the Israel Antiquities Authority think about Jericho. The first one, it talks about, the first photo I took, it's Jericho, the oldest city in the world. What it's actually is, because archaeologically we have older cities in Turkey, and we have one that's a city that was discovered not too long ago, and it's 7,000 years older than the pyramids. But we're not talking about this. But look at what Israel says about Jericho. The Jewish Hebrew-speaking nation of Israel does not hold itself to the belief of a 6,000-year-old earth or universe creation. Now, I took this photo, and it says, Jericho, the lowest place on earth, 1,300 feet below sea level, which is pretty impressive in itself, but it's 10,000 years old, in blessed peace, from the oldest city. And so, 10,000 years old, that's what Israel says of the city of Jericho, and that's just beginning. So let's go into Genesis chapter 1, verses 1 and 2. When it says God made all the primary, what it's talking about is God made all the primary elements of the universe. In the last study, I read the verse in Hebrew, but I'm just going to, for time's sake, just mention the first word in the first verse of the Bible, which happens to be the name of the first book of the Bible, Bereshit. Bereshit. Bereshit, we translate that into English, and it's a misnomer, the translation. This is respect to the translators, because I understand the complications of biblical translation or linguistic translation. I work in interpretation and translation quite a bit, in the writing of literature. So I have a deep, profound respect in that. But Bereshit is a word that's often not understood. Bereshit, when it says in the beginning, or Bereshit, it's not talking about a finished work, a one and done thing, but it's talking about how it began. I'm going to jump ahead. In chapter 4, we have the Bereshit of violence. We have the Bereshit of violence. And the first 12 chapters of Genesis are all about the Bereshit, how this began and how that began. The Bereshit of violence is when Cain slew Abel. And using that whole concept of Bereshit, that doesn't mean all the violence in the world and in history happened then. No, That was the first act of violence. And in chapter 6, we see that violence spread, and that's one of the reasons that God was going to judge the earth. So we're talking about how it began and how it developed and how it grew and became something else entirely different. And we see violence throughout the rest of the Bible. But where did it come from? Where was its beginning? Where was its initial? And how did it develop? Man has got extremely and morbidly creative in how to effectuate violence. Of course, we don't believe all that was done with Cain and Abel. No. It was just an opportunistic act. There, as we say in Spanish, it was a rabieta. It was an act of a fit of anger, and he responded negatively and with the first act of mortal violence. And so that was the Bereshit, how it began, and it developed from there. He created the laws of physics now, talking about in the beginning, God created the laws of physics and set them in motion to form the universe that we know today, which is still in development and it's still in motion to this day. And we can see that. It's something we can observe. It's observable. So it's science. Science is provable fact. Well, we can still theorize about many things, but there are things that we are seeing that we can conclude, yes, that's happening. And so Genesis 1:2 is a very important, it's a crucial verse because so much was formed out of that. We looked at the gap theory last week and examined the different aspects of that theory. But here, let's take a look of an Orthodox exegesis of this verse. Now the earth was unformed and void, and darkness was on the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God hovered over the face of the waters, in verse 2. And that's the Jewish publication scriptures. And this is telling us that first, the earth was in development. The earth was in development. It was in a zygotic stage or embryonic stage. I like to refer to it as a zygotic stage because the embryon comes afterwards. It was not yet in the condition to sustain life, as we can see. And we have geological evidence of that. That is something that happens with time. Now, how important is time with God or with the Genesis story? It's irrelevant. It's irrelevant because we have not yet come to the first day, according to scriptures. And so now the earth was unformed and void. Unformed, that word is pretty accurate. It wasn't yet the creation that it was supposed to be. It was in development, just as an embryon is, or an unborn child in the womb. It is what it's supposed to be, but it's not yet able to sustain life. It's not what it's created to be. It's not yet fulfilling its purpose. That's what those words mean. And here the Hebrew words are tohu vavohu. In Hebrew, it's written in like two different words, but it's actually three words, tohu vabohu, unformed and void. It does not mean destroyed. It doesn't talk about a work that was perfect and destroyed, but unoccupied and unable to fulfill its purpose. This is what we are seeing, and as the illustration there, it's just merely an illustration, and we know geologically that the earth was like that. And so like it was in a state that it could not sustain life. And God created that process. God's not in a hurry. The king never gets late. And so when he sees that it's in the state that it can sustain life, then he does something different. It says in darkness, in verse 2, the second half of the verse, it says, and the darkness was on the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God hovered over the face of the waters. Now, the thing is, in verse 2, we already have the earth. Consider it. This is not a part of the first day. The earth was in development, and it already exists before the first day. I wish I could speak much more of that, but I want you to just think about that. So we have verses 1 and 2. We do not have the first day yet. And so we have the Spirit of God hovering over the face of the waters. And they exist, their waters are on earth. This is what we're talking about. And finally, when God saw that the habitat that he had created for mankind, it was ready, as we might colloquially say, stick a fork in it. It's ready. It's to the place where it can sustain life. And in verse 3, we have it, the majestic words, and God said, let there be light. It's interesting that light, visible, what we call visible light, is actually invisible. We don't see light. God is light, and to our naked eye, he wouldn't be visible. We're not capable of seeing him anymore. We will one day see him face to face. We could see what he does. We could see everything that reflects him. But right now, we can see manifestations of God. And Christ was a visible manifestation of the invisible God. He was a tangible manifestation of the invisible God. We could see his works throughout the creation. We could see his works in our life. We can see clear and palpable evidence of God. God testifies of his being through his creation. This creation is not God, it's evidence of God. We talked about intelligent design. If you see design, you see intelligence. So you see something that created it that way, that it was made. It's not by chance. And so, like, if you think it's by chance, chance happened billions and billions of times over to create the countless intricacies of life, even all the way down to amino acids or single cell creatures that are so complicated we cannot recreate them. That's intelligence, that's design, that's purpose, that's intention. That is the evidence of God. Nobody would go to the moon and find an Apple Watch and say, oh, well, that happened because a meteorite hit the Earth, and the explosion and the heat and everything caused this. Nobody, it's just doesn't make sense. And I'm sorry for that infantile example, but yes, we have to go to that to get people to understand that the creation is evidence of a creator. And so God said, let there be light, and there was light. And like I said, light can only be seen when it touches something. I was talking to Jason, my son, yesterday, and I was talking about, it's interesting how on the earth, yeah, we have light. The very atmosphere glows and radiates. But you go to the moon where there is no atmosphere, there is no oxygen. Somebody said they put a restaurant on the moon, but yeah, the food was good, but the place had no atmosphere. Okay, that's one of my jokes, but moving right along. There's no atmosphere there, so light has nothing to reflect off of, and shadows are absolutely black. We have shadows here on the earth, but you can still see what's beyond the shadow under normal circumstances. But on the moon, it always looks like night. You can see the ground is lit up, but when you cast a shadow there, that shadow is absolute absence of light, because there's nothing that can refract or cause the light to spread even into shadowed areas. And we can see that. So, like, because there is an atmosphere. But so light is only visible when it touches something, which is why space looks black, and it's the same amount of light that's shining on the earth, but we can see the objects that light touches. This is why the moon glows. A full moon will light up the earth, although the moon does not emit its own light. Moving forward, and God saw the light, that it was good, and God divided the light from the darkness, and God called the light day, and the darkness he called night. And there was evening and morning. Now we have the first day. That's in verse 5. So whatever happened before is not included in the 7 days of creation. That's not me inventing something. That is merely what the scriptures openly and aggressively state. So we know that life, as we know it, can exist without light. We have creatures that live in the darkest caves or at the bottom of the deepest part of the oceans, and inconceivable, unimaginable situations that, or at environments that we cannot live in, but these creatures are just fine. But we also know that the genesis, or the Bereshit, of these creatures was in light. They just adapted. They were adapted to live in conditions without life. They without light. So they fundamentally occurred or experienced what we call in biology microevolution, not macro. They didn't change from one species to another. They merely adapted to that. That's species of creature became a different species of the same creature. Genetically, it's the same thing, but they've learned how to adapt and live without light or in near darkness, near total darkness, like bats. But they originally needed light, and they still do need light to exist because they depend upon things that light gives life to. So, nevertheless, light is fundamentally essential for life to exist. Again, Jesus spoke to them saying, I am the light of the world. Whoever follows me will not walk in darkness, but have the light of life. Jesus is our light, and we need him to live. It's interesting to note that God created light before he created stars. I'll get into that because the stars were created on the fourth day and light on the first day. So God had a message in that. He created lights and he created emitters of light on the fourth day. And God said, let there be light, verse 3, and there was light. The following is a thought-provoking postulation on the second day of creation. Let's move on to the second day. And you could find it in the Center for Scientific Creation. I've given a website there. And it's a postulation that I heard back in maybe 71 or 72 when I first started my theological studies. And it's fascinating. Some say that it's discredited. There are still scientific creationists that espouse it to this day. It's a fascinating postulation. I'm going to present it because to me it makes sense biblically. Okay, so Genesis chapter 1, verse 6-8. Let's start in verse 6 because in verse 5 he says, and that was the first day. Now we're entering into the second day. And God said, let there be an expanse in the midst of the waters. An expanse because the water covered the entire earth. There's an expanse. That's talking about the environment, the atmosphere. And so let it separate the waters from the waters. Now what? The waters are going to be divided. They're going to be separating waters from the waters. And that happened in several different ways. And God said, God made the expanse and separated the waters that were under the expanse from the waters that were above the expanse. Now we still have water above the expanse in a sense in clouds, in the form of clouds. But we're talking about something entirely stronger. We're talking about an entire ocean that's above the expanse. An incredible and almost immeasurable amount of water that was separated, and the expanse, or that the atmosphere was in the middle. And it says, and God made the expanse and separated the waters that were under the expanse from the waters that were above the expanse, and it was so. And God called the expanse heaven, and there was evening, and there was morning, and the second day. Now, the scriptures, heaven, that's the word Hashemayim. And so but we have the scriptures that talk about the heavens, plural. And we know that we can talk about the first heavens that are the environment in which we live. You know, there's the air in which the birds fly and the stars. And then we can talk about the other heavens where the astral bodies are, the astronomical bodies. We're talking about the planets, the stars, and all the plethora of other fascinating things that are in the expanse of space. And then we can talk about another heavens where God himself decides to have his throne. God can fill, he's omnipresent, but there's a place that he decided to call his own, and also there are other angelic beings there, and one day we ourselves will be there. And you can call it another dimension, you can call it what you want, you can put the term is, but the Bible talks about it being also heaven, and the scriptures, I believe in Hebrew, appear almost 400 times in the heaven or heavens. It's the same word, it's just put singular or plural. So this theory that I want to postulate as far as the separation of the water, it's the canopy theory. And that's an interesting thought I want you to take into consideration. There's no need to be dogmatic, but to me, it makes sense. By doing this, God created the heaven or the earth. By doing this, God created the earth with a gas cloud covering or canopy over the planet, not unlike the gas cloud that covers Venus, Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, or Neptune. They're gas covered. But this is a planet just like Venus that has a rock core, a solid core. Saturn and Jupiter and Saturn, we're not sure. We believe the entire planets are gaseous, or there's very little except for frozen gases in the core. Those are speculations because nobody's actually been to Jupiter, but we can tell by some of our observations with different types of different means of observing and scanning the surface. But they are gas-covered planets, and we're not seeing what we consider to be the surface of those things because of the canopy that covers them. And that the significant difference between the Earth and the other planets was that this gaseous canopy is primarily H2O. It's water, as the Genesis states, where the other canopied planets have noxious gases. And so this answers the fundamental question that we're going to see. It answers fundamental questions like, had it ever rained before the flood in Noah's day? We can find that in Genesis chapter 2. No, it had never rained. Because of the separation of the waters from the waters, the Bible says that he put dry land in between. And it says the water seeped up from the oceans that were below. He gathered the oceans, all the water in places on the surface, and we called those seas. I studied oceanography in my first university studies back in the early 70s, and oceanography even in high school. Of course, seas are different than oceans, but the Bible uses the word, or translates the word seas, talking about all aquatic bodies that cover the earth. Eliminating, of course, lakes or different things like that, but they call, in the Middle East, they call the Sea of Galilee, but the more correct name is the Lake of Gennesaret, or Tiberias, the lake. They call it a lake because concerning oceanography, it is more than a lake, because a sea would connect to a larger body of water, like the Red Sea connects to the Indian Ocean, and the Mediterranean Sea connects to the Atlantic Ocean. There's always a connection to a larger body of water when you have a sea. The Dead Sea possibly, we find a geological possibility, possibly did connect to the Red Sea, which connects to the Indian Ocean in ancient times, because the Dead Sea is still losing water. It's still decreasing and shrinking in size. And so we believe that it is like it is because it is the lowest place on the face of the earth. It's lower than Jericho. And so it probably was on the same level as the Sea of Galilee. It was a living thing until the deserts began to grow after the flood, post-flood, and so we lost water there. So there's probably a historical reason to call it the Sea of Galilee. More accurately today, the Lake of Gennesaret, or Tiberias. So just so you know.